Greetings, friends, and welcome to this edition of Tales from the Tabletop, the video series where I scour the internet in my own personal experience to bring you anecdotes of adventure, the fun, the funny, the farcical, and the teachable moments from Warhammer to D&D and everything in between. And I take my favorite story from each batch and illustrate it for your listening and viewing pleasure. Today's stories, in my own humble opinion, I think are particularly fun, so let's begin. The first story comes from Mark, who is describing one of his favorite character moments ever in a role-playing game. Mark writes, I was playing in a Rolemaster campaign, where we alternated between playing gods and playing avatars of the gods. We always played the same god, but each avatar adventure featured a new set of avatars thematically appropriate to their gods. The avatars would inherit some traits from their god and from their predecessor avatars of the same god, but each avatar was a character in its own right. And if you are already confused, don't worry because me too. The story makes more sense as we go. Anyway, it was my turn to play an avatar of peace. I decided that this avatar should be an herbalist with a special affinity for mind-altering substances. Yep, I made an ancient fantasy equivalent of a pothead hippie drug dealer named Zayman. Or Zaman. Or Zaymon. Or Zaman. I'm gonna call him Zayman because that's my favorite. Zayman had a habit of walking into the enemy camp and trying to convince everyone to light up with him. He's a fun character, but not a particularly powerful one. As we adventured, Zayman collected new herbs. His substance-related antics were amusing and were often significant to the story, but herbalism-related magic didn't get much use, especially in combat. For that, he relied heavily on calming spells and some druid-like buffs. Most of the herbs he had were either poisons, which he didn't want to use, or healing herbs, which were superfluous given that he could cast a decent healing spell directly. Okay, really, most of his herbs were of a recreational variety, even if they had other theoretical uses. So when we finally reached the campaign's climactic fight against the big boss, I got odd looks when my first combat action was to cast Herb Mastery, which enhanced the effects of one of my herbs. For months, Zayman had been carting around a single dose of an herb he had foraged that, when taken by someone good at heart, would provide a substantial bonus to all actions for 1 to 4 hours. On this second turn, he imbibed that dose, now at triple its normal strength. It basically transformed him into a demigod. Well, actually, since we were also portraying gods in that game, I have no true point of comparison. It's probably safe to say he was temporarily a bit more powerful than the gods themselves. The bonus was so large, it was plus 75 in a game that uses percentile dice. It was so large that he could succeed almost automatically at pretty much any normal task, regardless of whether he had any skill in it at all. Anything he was actually good at was supercharged to the point of insanity. Making things more ridiculous, in the Rolemaster system, no matter how difficult something is, or how unskilled you are, you can always attempt any action at any appropriate penalty. Cast spells above your level, cast spells from a school that you didn't know, use skills you've never trained in, and so on. The penalties can be huge, but there's always a chance. There's also a ritual magic system to create custom magical effects, with casting time and difficulty scaling according to the level of the effect desired. So, with a booming voice, Zayman shouted, "Why can't we all get along?" my drugged out hippie started throwing around insane levels of power. The party proceeded to kill the main adversary, the shape-shifting leader of a malicious mystery cult, without too much trouble. However, Zayman was a pacifist and preferred to avoid killing when possible, so he promptly resurrected our adversary. In this setting, resurrection spells haven't been invented yet, but ritual magic rules plus an insane bonus meant that it happened anyway. This big bad experienced the first ever resurrection of the world and decided he needed some new priorities. Unsurprisingly, it was a life-changing event, and the big bad went forth with supercharged instructions to sin no more. Thus, he founded a bizarre new super-secret cult, this time dedicated to the ideals of peace. And what did Zayman do with the remainder of his 1 to 4 hours of near absolute power? He smoked a pipe. This next one's a short one, but a good one, and it's from Gawain. And he is answering the question, as a player of tabletop role-playing games, what is the strangest experience you had when someone discovered that you played that kind of game? Gawain writes, when I was younger and lived in a pub, we used to have a weekly game in our vault. One day, one of the local drunks came in, sat down, and demanded to play. Now, this was a pub where Friday nights were fight nights, not watched in a TV, but watched in the car park. We had drug dealers, thugs, gang members, and ex-convicts of just about every flavor. So, obviously, we rolled him a new character right away. D&D, not just for nerds. Recently, I read Lenny McLean's autobiography, and for those of you unaware, Lenny McLean was what in America we would call a bouncer, what in London at the time was called a minder for different clubs and pubs, but he made most of his big money as an unlicensed bare-knuckle boxing champion. And so reading his stories of these unlicensed fights that happen in pub parking lots and whatnot gives me just a small window into this world. And if one of those characters came to me and said, "You playing D&D? Me too, roll him up." Yeah, I'd roll that guy's character right away. Also, as an aside, when I first started playing D&D, the people who introduced it to me weren't a bunch of nerds. They were the cool kids. It was the cool kids who were playing D&D. Also, the pretty girl, and I wanted to get to know her better. Our next story comes from Andrew, and it is titled, "The Bloodthirster is None Too Happy to See You." I was running my first campaign in Dark Heresy, the Warhammer 40k RPG system, and I had a problem. I'm lucky and happy to say that all my players were capable and clever, but one of them was being a royal pain in my ass. This player had a remarkable capacity for twisted reasoning, underhanded plans, and money-making opportunities. He is a joy to see in action, but a huge pain to try and rein in. His character was a debauched noble, playing the noble background with the scum profession. Think a highborn gentleman rogue. He'd been throwing wrenches of Imperial Monkey grade in my plans, and generally being a derailing element in the overall plan. Though, to be fair, he was entertaining. Luckily, my campaigns are mostly invented by the seat of my pants, so I came up with a mechanic just for him. The Acolytes were exploring a warehouse of a group of illegal ritual object dealers. You know, the place where cultists go to get all of the materials for their various rites and summonings. The party was being stealthy, for once, and I was describing how they'd overheard some of the guards, and how they had been talking about the weird stuff happening. The sort of stuff that occurs when you put enough objects of dark power in one area. You know, as you do. They had made it toward the back of the massive building, and I looked to my troublesome player and tell him, roll willpower, which is a stat in this game. Roll willpower to resist curiosity. He gives me a look, but he rolls. See, the character had done things out of curiosity several times, with interesting results. So I invented a check to see if he could rein himself in and, by extension, try to exert a little control. He failed the roll, and this is what I told him. On a nearby table by a number of large crates covered in purity seals, there are 3 books. They are big, like tomes of scripture, though these scriptures are bound in a disquietingly soft leather, or marked with strange symbols foreign to the Imperial Creed. Your own curiosity gets the better of you, and you hurry over to take a better look. When you pick up one of the books, it snaps open, and you begin speaking words without any control over your mouth. Once you finish, 3 flamers of the Chaos God Tzeentch manifest and then move to attack as the book falls from your hands. This was the player's first interaction with demonkind in this game, and so it was suitably pants-browning. It would have been worse, except the damn things couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. The dice were cruel, and no attack was landing. They were rolling so bad that I ruled that the fireballs they were flinging were impacting the area around the players, including the massive, ward-papered crate nearby. After enough strikes, the wards were weak enough that the bloodthirster inside broke free and was none too pleased. A bloodthirster is a greater demon of the blood god Khorne, like Khorne, not like the band. As I said before, my players are bright enough to know that when fighting something is the wrong move. The bloodthirster would have cheesed the lot of them, but lucky for the party, it was more pissed with the flamers than it was with the group of squishy mortals hanging about. In the resulting firefight, pun! They were able to slip away and use the confusion to run like hell. Luckily for them, they'd found what they were looking for, so they didn't have to go back later. But that is still one of the best highlights from that game. I kept the curiosity rolls going throughout the rest of the campaign, and that player is now permanently banned from playing the Noble Scum combination, much to the amusement of himself. He would actually, regularly, fail the curiosity rolls on purpose just to see what insanity would happen next. So yeah, my mechanic backfired, but it was fun. This next one has some great advice that I think anyone at all playing tabletop role-playing games should hear. Let us begin. This is from Matthew. Matthew is answering the question, what is the worst mistake you have ever made playing a tabletop RPG? This might be a bit more philosophical an answer than you meant, but I think the worst mistake I made was allowing arguments to take over the game too often when I was a younger DM. This happened when players debated written rules and when physics were argued in a fantasy game. This was almost part of the pastime back in the 80s and 90s, however. I also feel like so much more could have been played and accomplished without the arguing. As a DM, one should set the standard at the start. Of course, I'm 25 plus years older now, but this is how I start my campaigns now as to back then. Number 1, no arguing about rules. I will rule on the situation in the moment, and if there is a question, then message me or talk to me after the game or in between sessions. Number 2, No arguing the science behind spells, magical abilities, and extraordinary feats. I will rule in the moment and rule as written. Otherwise, no debating science or physics in a fantasy game. I hope every D&D player and DM gets to read this post, because despite the fun we have with this hobby, so much more fun could be had without the meaningless debates. Intrepid journeys, adventurers. Matthew is 100% correct. As somebody who was a kid and playing D&D in the mid to late 90s, stopping and having an argument about the physics or the combat rules was 100% half of the game for me and my anal nerd friends who could not let anything go. And it also inspired us and drove us to read as much as we could about medieval weapons and medieval armor and medieval combat and tactics and whatnot. And that was just time that would have been better spent just playing the game. However, conversely, silver lining, myself and those friends did a lot of reading, and to this day, I have a very active interest in medieval history. I even have my own favorite medieval kings now. But I digress. This next story comes from La Fontaine, which is the same name as the famous voiceover artist who did a ton of the movie previews. You know the guy. In a world where a renegade robot cop. That guy. His name was La Fontaine. Cool name. La Fontaine writes about the most mood-breaking moment he ever had at a tabletop role-playing game. Let us begin. It was a D&D 5th edition campaign. I was GMing. It was quiet as the party assaulted an abandoned tower filled with the undead. As they adventured, they discovered a room with an amber flickering light inside of it. It wound up being a man with a scary and scarred face, actively torturing some poor guy who was screaming while the scar-faced man chuckled. Of course, the party wasn't gonna sit there and let this happen, when suddenly, the man walks away for a brief moment out of view. The party leans in closer to see where he went before bursting through. At this point at the table, I have described him to the level of a Stephen King novel. As they lean in, the cleric, a girl at our table, was behind everyone keeping a lookout. I draw the players in a bit towards the center of the table as I whisper that they don't see him, and if they're really quiet, they could grab the poor guy unnoticed. As the paladin says he is for sure going in, I tell the cleric in a whisper at the table while everyone else is leaning in. As you see your friends and your party creep through the door, you feel an unsettling unease. A stiff yet slimy feel contacts your skin, giving you goosebumps. As you slowly turn, you spot a very small web that has drifted from the abandoned rafters above. It lands on your shoulder and lays there. In a moment of clarity, you realize that something must have disturbed the area above you for that web to descend upon you as heavily as it did. As you look upwards to investigate this sinking feeling, a pair of yellow eyes attached to a face gaze back at you. The rotting smell offends your nose. Sharp, blood-drenched claws of this creature hide its true visage. You squint a bit, curious if this creature is an undead bird of some sort with the way it's perched on the molded beams above. I slap the table hard. It is the scarred-faced man in a sickening pose, grinning from ear to ear. He leaps at you, licking his lips as if he craves the taste of your ears, your eyes, and your flesh. Our cleric screamed at the table and then farted. Really loud and really long. It was suddenly quiet at the table again. Her poor face turned beet red, and then we all fell apart laughing together. I gave her a point of inspiration for imagining the scene in such detail as to scare her that much. And from that point on, my villain was forever named Fart Scareman instead of Azabalicus, the Undead Doctor. The mood was definitely ruined, but it was the funniest way possible, and it ended up being a great night. This last story is the one that I've been illustrating this whole time. It's a lot of fun. I hope it was worth the wait. Let's dive in. This story is from Ryan, and Ryan writes, I actually just recently got into D&D after a good few years of being curious. So far, we've had one session, and it was mostly to test things out for our DM. They're relatively new. And I needed practice and help working through the details of the campaign that we'll be doing later this month. So it was the DM and 3 players. Myself, a chaotic evil halfling bard, a possibly chaotic neutral half-orc wizard, and a lawful good dwarf fighter. The characters' personalities all made for a pretty fun first session. Mine was utterly ridiculous because I like playing absolutely crazy. The only item in my character's inventory is a 15-kilogram sack of cocaine, which he used as a currency to limited success. He also only cared about getting people to join his weird clown church cult. I succeeded in converting almost every major NPC we came across, which is quite a lucky feat. I also never got names right, and only wanted to do the main quest for the money. The dwarf was your stereotypical burly, tough drunk who liked getting in bar fights and clobbering ne'er-do-wells, which mostly meant my character. The dwarf went off to the mine to solve the town's problems, while me and the wizard got into some Scooby-Doo mysteries. You mean you split the party? You are evil. The wizard was uninterested in the money, but he just wanted to collect neat books for his library. So when the dwarf and I headed for the town hall to find the mayor, he headed to the town hall's library instead and found a few magical tomes. Now, among these tomes were a Book of the Underdark, which is a portal to a Lovecraftian hell dimension, a Book of Destruction, which caused instant death when opened, a Book of Insight, which caused nearby objects of significance to glow, and a Book of Swords, which just summoned a whole bunch of swords. He had other books stashed away, but these were the most fun. Now, somewhere along the way, I mentioned my character's cocaine stash, and his character was intrigued. So, being a little twit my halfling was, he quickly put on his con artist hat and said it was a magical powered elixir of life, rejuvenation, and eternal stamina. I said it could do pretty much anything, and was so rare this sack represented probably the only supply in all the land. The wizard had no gold, but he offered to trade a secret. Greedy and curious, and still thinking he was swindling the wizard, the deal was made. 2 grams of cocaine for a secret scrawled on a bit of parchment. There are thousands of cicadas nesting underground right now. That was the secret, which is not actually a helpful secret. Not really much of a secret at all, just a fact. That said, my character's worst stat was his intelligence, so he took it with a wink and walked off muttering, "Ha ha, sucker." Skip forward to the end of the session, and the DM mentions that this session will probably not continue from this point, as it was just a practice sample session. We're all cool with that, and we flung the whole thing together in the last minute anyways. But then the Wizards player looks at me with a gleam in his eye and says, "Well, before we go, I just have one more thing I want to do." "Oh yeah?" Yeah. So, little halfling man, would you like a piece of valuable treasure?" "What treasure?" "What's this book? It's an ancient tome containing vast amounts of knowledge." "Sure, I'll take a..." "Wait a minute. What language is it written in?" It doesn't matter. It's a picture book." "Oh, okay. Wait a minute now. What's it about? I don't want to read anything boring." "Oh, I haven't read it yet, but it's exciting. Just open it." "Wait, is it about the..." My character leans in quietly and whispers, "The CICADASs?" "Oh, yeah, said the wizard. "It should tell you everything you need to know about those." "Well, great." "So you open the book?" "Yep, my character opens the book." It was the Book of Destruction, and we both died instantly. I never saw that coming, and I guess it goes to show knowledge really is power. Best ending to a game: murder-suicide by face-melting book. For those, if you've been watching these videos for a while, you may remember a while back my second Morkborg-only episode where I made such a large, elaborate drawing of some poor guy just before he got his face melted off, and I have been just beside myself. And I consoled myself at the time. It's like, this is a great illustration. I needed to stretch myself, get myself some more foreground, really stress that middle ground, and put the character in the background, because my characters are almost always front and center. I needed that exercise, and it's role-playing games. It's a ton of D&D. It's a ton of farcical stories. I'm gonna get the chance to draw somebody's face melting off in the near future, and that's how I consoled myself. And sure enough, here's the opportunity to get not one, but 2 faces melting off. And oh, what fun I had. So much fun that I made 2 different versions of it. The color version, which I always meant to make, but when I was at the black and white zone, I was so happy with the black and white, I said, you know what, I want to keep going. I want to keep going, and I want to put some more hatching on there and see how far I can take the black and white version. So here are the results. And if you'd like this original art for yourself, it'll be for sale on my store on my website at coffeeandhate.biz. Click store at the top. And if you're interested in other bits of my art, such as these stickers right here, and here, and here, then sign on my Patreon, Gabe's Sticker Club for Attractive People. Should be a link in the doobly-doo below. That's it for today, friends. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And may your dice roll high and never be cursed. They were rolling... I spilled my water. I chose the wrong cup for this.